things start going well, right? Like you would think like, oh, things are going well. Like this is a cause for celebration. We should be happy. The avoidant person sees that increasing closeness as a danger sign. So as you're like, yay, they're like, danger, danger.
Get away from me.
Right. Because now that we're closer, now you're just more able to hurt me. Like I've let you in like the circle of trust. And like, once that happens, now you can really do some damage.
All right, Gary, we are going to be talking about one of the most fun and exciting topics you can imagine, which is attachment styles. Can we have some fun with this conversation today? Because I feel like most people just start yawning when they start thinking about it. What is an attachment style and what is all this stuff? So, I don't know. Talk to me. What do you think about attachment styles?
You know what? You asked if we can have fun with this. I think we absolutely can, because learning about relationships is always fun, right? You're going to learn something during this podcast that you didn't know before. And there's one thing to learn about in relationship science, it's attachment. It's the one grand theory we have in relationship science, which a grand theory is just something that explains a ton, right? So once you know just a little bit about attachment, you can learn a lot about how your relationship works and how it's going to, proceed going forward. So you're going to learn a lot in a very short period of time.
Okay, so let's dive into it. So what defines an attachment style? Like, where does this come from? What is it exactly?
So attachment style, it goes all the way back to the relationship you have with your caregivers, right? Your parents, which typically just basically means mom. And it's based on the consistency of care you received as an infant. And so the big breakthrough they had in the 1980s, as recently as that, was basically like, hey, that same pattern of care you had with your mom, that carries over into your romantic relationships, right? It's not about your mom being the one who takes care of you. Now it's your romantic partner. And so basically what they found was the same styles that they were observing in infants, you see play out in romantic relationships. So this is literally the closest thing to Freud being correct that we have going.
Is it like the only thing that he was actually right about?
Yes, it's one of the, right? So like when Freud says like, your childhood influences everything later on. Well, no, not exactly. And there's a lot of that Freud gets wrong, but attachment theory is pretty close.
I don't want my mother. Isn't that one of the other ones?
Yeah, you're really not looking to bed your mom necessarily.
Okay, thank God. Okay. Mom, if you're listening, you're in the clear. You're good. Oh my gosh. I'm sweating now based on that joke. Don't tell jokes like that. Okay, so one of the things Freud actually got right is this idea, and I think that a lot of this comes down to is that in relationships, we don't necessarily seek what makes us happy. We seek what is comfortable to us. And is that a part of what attachment styles, like what they talk about with attachment styles? Because that's something I've noticed a lot, is people just tend to be attracted to the very type of person that they're just most familiar with and comfortable with.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's a lot of replaying the patterns that you established from when you were young, right? And so if you were accustomed to a certain type of interaction with a caregiver, that's your default setting, basically. That's how you think the world works. And so much of how we think the world works is predicated on our upbringing and how we dealt with our family life. And so this is just one more way. And so as it turns out, it can be complicated, but you can also make attachment really simple in the sense that, there's basically 3 different attachment styles that people fall into.
Okay.
So the biggest one, the best one, and this is the no doubt about it best one to be, which luckily about 70% of people are, is secure. And so if you're secure, it means you are comfortable being close to others, you're comfortable relying on other people, you're comfortable trusting other people. You're not worried about them leaving you or hurting you all the time. And it's just, it's sort of you've learned that the people you love and care about can be relied upon. They're reliable. They're consistent. They're there. Right. And so,
So 70%? I always quote 50%, but I could definitely be getting that wrong. Do you think it's as high as 70% are secure? Maybe it's because a lot of women who are drawn to our programs don't fall into secure attachment. But
so I think you can have a selection effect, sure. Like, so, people that are looking for, people that are historically have had trouble in their relationships, that they're generally going to be a more insecure type of group. But, the research data is about 70% are secure, which is really good news, right? And the other thing that this whole thing about being secure is really good news for is that it means that your parents didn't have to be perfect, right? So a lot of times people, when they hear like, oh, well, how I was brought up, that's going to influence how I was in my romantic relationship. We can easily pick out all the times our parents screwed things up, right? Like your parents yelled at you or like were mean to you or spanked you, you know, all these different kinds of things. And so just because you had some rough spots in your upbringing, it doesn't mean you're going to be insecure, because, you know, most of us, people are resilient, right? Amazingly resilient. So most of us end up secure, luckily.
Yeah. And is it based on mostly trauma in childhood, or are there some children who are maybe more sensitive to others, to situations that causes them to then be an avoidant, or I don't know. How does that work? Have they figured that out?
We haven't exactly pinpointed. I mean, this is like one of the, you know, beautiful and frustrating things about psychology. There's always this, you know, interaction of like qualities you have as a person versus your experiences, right? And it's always, you know, what causes you to be the person you are? Well, it's a combination of both, and it's this complex interaction. And so, you know, certainly one person could have 7 different traumas as a child and emerge perfectly secure, right? Right. Some other person could have 1 and end up avoidant or anxious ambivalent, right? And so there's definitely that interaction where it's, you know, not all things are created equal, and that's why it's really hard to make any kind of judgment or assumptions about other people's experiences. And, you know, there's no shoulds, like, oh, you should be fine, you had a perfect childhood. Well, it all depends really actually on how you interpret things.
Right. That's so true. And I mean, there's so many factors into what makes us who we are, right? There's obviously our childhood, then there's our experiences and the people we have around us, and our support group. And maybe having a support group is what causes you to then have a secure attachment style, because even though you were traumatized from your parents, maybe you had this other group to lean on, or maybe just your DNA. You're just a little bit less, I don't know, for lack of a better word, fragile throughout the experience. I don't know if that's the right word, or sensitive to it, but regardless, some people seem to be, obviously, based on their childhood trauma or experiences, have this way of interacting with their romantic partners because of it. So what does it mean? Why don't we dive into each one? And obviously secure is probably the easiest one to start with. It just means you're pretty comfortable with relationships. And I think you already talked a little bit about that. But why don't you describe the other two a little bit? I think that'd be helpful.
Sure. So, you know, he said most people are secure. So that's 70%. Then there's the other 30%. Now, there are 2 different ways to be insecure. The first is you're avoidant, right? Avoidant are people who are not comfortable being close to other people, and they're worried about being left, right? And so, you know, there's a lot of fears you can have in relationships. And so avoidant people have 2 big fears, like, what if you hurt me, right? And what if you leave me? And so if you think of kind of the greatest hits of the bad things that can happen in a relationship, those are the 2 biggest ones. And so avoidant people are constantly kind of worried about that, right? Now, they want a relationship. They want all the same things everybody else wants in a relationship, but it's counterweighted all the time by this fear of being hurt and being left. And so as a result of that, they put up walls, right? It's like, I know you might hurt me, so I'm going to keep you at a distance.
Yeah.
And you can imagine, like, I mean, that leads to really mediocre relationships, right? I mean,
I'm just imagining every woman listening to this right now thinking of like all the guys she's dated in the past, like that might fall into that category. You have just like this mind-blowing moment.
Yeah, right. It's like, you know, it's such a stereotypical male trait as well, right? And so the guys are kind of, you know, brought up to be like that lone wolf, like, I don't need anybody, I don't need to talk to anybody, I'm good.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a great trait, right? And so what happens in relationships, if you're in a relationship with an avoidant person, it's like this roller coaster. It's like a lot of highs and lows because, like I said, they want to be close. They want that great relationship. So as things start going well, right? Like you would think like, oh, things are going well. Like this is a cause for celebration. We should be happy. The avoidant person sees that increasing closeness as a danger sign. So as you're like, yay, they're like, danger,
get away from me.
Right. Because now that we're closer, now you're just more able to hurt me. Like I've let you in like the circle of trust. And like, once that happens, now you can really do some damage.
Right.
And now clearly most partners are not going to do that, but that's what makes it avoidant attachment, you know, insecure, because they're constantly worried about these things that may not even come to pass. Like they're just hyper vigilant about threats in a way that's counterproductive to a healthy relationship.
Yeah, and on the note of gender stereotypes on this. I think a lot of women who have avoidant attachment styles think that there's something like wrong with them as a female, because most women are supposed to be like the ones who are kind of needy in a relationship, and the ones who are always pushing things forward. And we actually have a lot of avoidant clients or women who would categorize themselves that way, or have been categorized by a therapist as that. And tell them, look, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually not. There's nothing wrong with you in that sense. Like, it's something to be aware of and something to work on. But a lot of them think that it's so weird for a woman to be that way. But do you have any data or background of what if men tend to be more avoidant than women as far as like the clinical definition of it?
They do, right? I mean, it's more of a male typical trait. And so if, imagine the woman going through that's experiencing this avoidance kind of recognizes it as a problem, which is good, right? Because if you recognize it, then you can do something about it. Whereas the guys that kind of fall into this pattern, it's just like, just a dude. That's how dudes are. Right. And like I said, there's no real motivation, or there's no lever that's like kind of saying like, oh, you really got to do something about this. It's just like, that's how I am.
Here's the $1 million question for you, though. I was definitely an avoidant in like from the ages of 23 to 28, just because I wanted to like go have fun and live my life. But it didn't come from a place of actually what you were describing. It was just like, I don't want a relationship. I just want to like live and date and do all that stuff. So I don't know. Does that fall into that category? Is that possible?
Yeah.
Can you?
So it actually it's like a subcategory of avoidant. It's something that later became known as dismissing, where it's basically like you don't want any attachments. Like, you're keeping people at a distance. All the same kind of behaviors, but like you just said, for the exact opposite reason almost. It's like, it's not that you're worried about getting hurt. It's just that you were just disinterested. Like, you're just like this. Like, I don't like. It's almost like a hyper independence.
Right.
And
selfish.
so
I want to have fun. Like, I didn't want to be in a relationship. And I probably, if I could go back in time, and probably smack that guy across the face and be like, "Hey, man, grow up a little bit." I probably would.
Sure.
But I also, at the same token, I do think that there's something to being in your early 20s. Certainly, that's why we don't allow any. I don't say allow, but generally speaking, we don't accept women who are younger than 25 or 24 into our program, because there's something to that phase in life where you're like, hey, look, just explore and meet lots of people and have fun, and like it doesn't have to be so serious yet at this stage. So I'm curious on your thoughts on like age groups.
Yeah, and what we know about attachment is over time, people just generally get more secure, right? And whether that's it's hard to really disentangle whether that's just like a natural aging maturation type of process, or chances are by the time people are into their 40s and 50s, they've had a long-term, stable, healthy relationship, and that helps you be more secure.
Well, it makes sense to me, at least, if you would be more avoidant when you're younger because you want to stay independent because you're young and you value excitement and all of the fun things that comes with being really young and single. It also makes sense that you might be anxious when you're young because you're not yet very sure of yourself. And confidence, I think, is something that kind of you grow into as you get older as well. And just generally being a secure person, whether it's with yourself or your relationships, that just makes sense that you would grow into that, regardless of what you may have experienced earlier in life.
Yeah, and so that anxious style you're talking about is sometimes called anxious ambivalence, other times called preoccupied. And so that's the other way to be insecure. So there's about 15% that are avoidant, there's about 15% that are this anxious, ambivalent, preoccupied style. And it's actually almost the exact opposite of avoidance, in the sense that you're super needy, you're super clingy, you're super, high intensity, like almost like hyper romantic. Like relationships are everything. Being with your partner is everything. You want to spend every moment of every day. Like it's just so over the top. Like, if you have somebody that's like following you around and stalking you every moment, right? A partner like that, they're probably anxious, right? They're probably anxious and ambivalent. And it's like, it's such a strong, hyper love kind of way of approaching relationships. And it's kind of like you said, it can be out of a place of neediness and not kind of knowing your own way.
Right.
But it's like, we said the avoidance don't want to get hurt and they don't want to get left. So they want to get close to people. And so the anxious folks, they don't want to get left either. So, but rather than putting up walls, they do the exact opposite. Instead of keeping you at a distance so you don't hurt them, they keep you as close as possible so you don't hurt them. So you don't get a chance to leave.
I once had a friend that went out one night without his girlfriend, and they were only dating for like a month. She called him 28 times that night. 28.
It's like, anxious.
It's like, yeah, it's just one of those moments. We literally, like, we were just hanging out, and I think he had his phone in the other room, and he went back and looked at his phone, and he literally is like 28 calls, and we were just like, what is this? Yep. And clearly looking backwards, there must be an anxious attachment style.
It's that constant, like, needing to check in. Where were you? What are you doing? Who are you with? Like, it leads to a lot of jealousy. Right. It's the, like, I love you. And if you don't say I love you back quick enough or in the right kind of tone, they're like, what's up with that? You don't love me? Like, what's going on? Like, it's very hard to convince them of your undying love and affection. And, like, it's just hard to get to the level that they want you to be at. And so as a partner of somebody who's anxious, it's tough. It is really, really tough to keep up.
Yeah, I wonder, so in my program, Love Accelerator, I feel like we cater more towards anxious attachment style. We probably have more who are in that category. And I think our program is probably even better suited for that, because a lot of what we do is we make love a little bit less romantic and more strategic. And we slow things down and just so many things that gives kind of these, I don't know, what's the right word? We give them kind of a plan to take that helps them stay a little bit more rational throughout the process. And I wonder in relationship synergy if you feel it's the same, or maybe you more experienced avoidant, or maybe just secure. Do you have any sense of that? And obviously you're not making any diagnoses, but like the general sense of it.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think that you guys do a really nice job of in Love Accelerator is to help the anxious folks is the concept you talk about it in terms of pacing, right? Like, don't go all in all at once, like kind of like keep some distance and just like really just kind of put some speed bumps along the road to like kind of make sure people aren't moving too fast too soon, which I think is really helpful. And it's exactly those kind of strategies that folks need. To your point about relationship synergy and kind of what we're dealing with, I think what it ends up being, I think most of the women in that program are secure. Yeah. Because I think they're secure. They're coming from a place of, wanting to learn more about their relationship. Things are going well, and they just want to get better at them. But I think they're dealing with a lot of insecure partners, and it's kind of to try to help learn how to manage some of those behaviors. But I think I don't think it's anxious as much as. I think it's the anxiety over abandonment, right? Like, so this attachment thing, there's a bunch of styles, but there's two dimensions, and one's the comfort with closeness, but the other one is this anxiety over abandonment. And I think it's, once people have found the one, they want to hold on to it, right? They don't want to lose it. Yeah. And so I think if there's an attachment dimension that the relationship synergy folks tap into more than anything, it's that I don't want to lose this great thing I found. And, they
don't want to go back to the little love steps. They don't want to go back to my program.
Right. It's like you want to delete every one of those dating apps you've ever used and never see them again once you found your person, right? And so, I think they're smart in learning about some of these things. That's because it's going to help them do that. It's going to make their relationship better, and so that they don't have to go back, go back in time. Like they want to be done with that phase.
So let's think of some practical kind of advice here. So let's start with the 70% that are secure. If you've been dating and you find yourself dating someone who is avoidant or anxious, do you have any insight as to how to navigate that? Is it something that you should not consider them for a lifelong partner, or should you cater to their needs? What do you think from a practical way of navigating this they should do?
Well, I think one of the things, and actually I have seen this in some of the relationship synergy folks, is, when you're it's like secure attachment is great. Like, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic. But one of the things that I think can be a potential downside of secure attachment is if you're secure and you're with someone who's not, you can kind of like take it upon yourself, like, I'm going to fix them.
Yeah, fix them.
Right? Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm really good at this. I can fix anybody. I mean, it's tough to be the savior, right? And attachment can change. It absolutely can. I think the best thing for people to know, and just learning a little bit about attachment, is go into it with clear eyes. Like really know what you're dealing with, because it's not impossible for people to change their attachment, but it will be slow.
Yeah.
Right. It's
and they
not
have to
gonna,
want it. I mean, that's the thing. They have to want to change, right? It's like an alcoholic, right? You can overcome alcoholism. You just have to want to work on that and be aware of it. And I don't know if it's that's an exact analogy here. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But my point is just like if you can't change anyone that you're with, they have to want it. And if they're open to understanding their attachment styles and even talking about it and want to learn more about that, great. But if they want to ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist and call you crazy and gaslight you and think that you're nuts for whatever, then that's a big problem. And we can't be involved with someone like that if we are secure, because we're just going to sit back and be like, what are we dealing with? This is craziness. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. And you know it's, you can find somebody better. Like there's always, if you really are secure, like you're one of the people that's got it right. Like, you know the right way to deal with relationships. And like, can you spend all of your time trying to fix this person? Now, if you've been married for 10, 15 years and you have a lot of time invested, then, you probably do owe it to that person to kind of stick with it, right? A little bit. But if you've just met somebody in the first 2 months and you realize they have these strong avoidant or anxious tendencies, next, right? Like,
next. If he calls you 25 times, all right, and you're like, what is going on with this guy? No, I can change him. He'll change once we're in a relationship. Nah, maybe not.
You're not going to change them. And you can't want them to change for them. Like you said, they have to want to change. And it's like, I always say to people, relationships aren't easy, but they shouldn't be so damn hard either.
Right.
And it's like, if you're with this person who's avoidant and constantly like putting up walls and not wanting to talk, and like, how are you ever going to get close to that person? How is that? Right. Was that what you wanted before you like started all of this? Like, is that the kind of partner was like your dream partner? It wasn't. There's no way it was.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's an important point, that this can be changed. Like, I think a lot of my clients in particular, I hear this a lot. I am X, Y, or Z, and that could be any type of identity that they want to connect with. I am anxious, therefore that's why I do this. I think that's actually pretty disempowering. And like, even just saying something like, I used to be, or I tend to have anxious attachment style like characteristics, like even just using that difference in language rather than being like a tattoo on your arm, like I am like this, so therefore he needs to call me 3 times a day. That's disempowering. That's not going to help you in your life. So I think it's just really helpful to just be aware if you do, let's maybe transition to, if you do have anxious or geez, I'm mind blanking, avoidant attachment style, then it is something you can actively work on and you can move past. So if you are fit in that category, should you really be looking for someone who is secure? It's likely yes, right?
Sure. Yeah, and I think your point needs to be emphasized, right? Is like people. It's not determinism, right? It's not deterministic. It's like once you can grow up in a terrible household on these things and end up avoidant. It doesn't mean you're avoidant for the rest of your life and like there's nothing you can do. And kind of that shift in language is really important. Instead of thinking I'm an avoidant person, it's like I'm a person who has some avoidant tendencies. I'm a recovering, and I've heard people say like I'm a recovering anxious ambivalent person, right? And it's like, there's a path, right? And you can change. And a lot of it depends on your relationship experiences, right? It can go the other way too. You could be super secure, have a devastating breakup, and end up feeling pretty avoidant or pretty anxious after that.
Right.
But, to your question, if you kind of, and we have them in the program, it's like these little quizzes you can take to kind of figure out where you fall in terms of your attachment. If you find that you have some insecure tendencies, right, either anxious or avoidant, the best possible thing you can do is find a secure partner and trust them, right? And so your secure partner, if you're avoidant, they're going to tell you things like, I'm not going to hurt you. And, you're avoidant in the back of your head. You're going to be like, yes, you are. I know you are. It's just a matter of time. I just don't know when it's going to happen, but it's definitely going to happen. But you got to kind of rewire that circuitry a little bit and be like, just hear their words, see their intentions, see how they've been acting towards you, and see that they really are there. Like they're showing you that they're there, and just start paying more attention to those things. It's the same with if you find yourself being anxious, your partner is going to tell you that they love you, and don't second guess everything they say, right? Like, you just have to trust, right? And yes, I mean, that's going to make you vulnerable, but like that's can lead to problems, sure, but most of the time it leads to really great relationships. You can't have a great relationship without being vulnerable. And so if you refuse to be vulnerable, you refuse to have that trust, you're basically just saying, I'm never going to have the healthy long-term relationship that I say I want.
Yeah. Yeah, I find with anxious in particular, anxious attachment style, clients who seem to fall into that category, I tend to constantly just be reassuring them that there is no problem. Like sometimes I just feel like it's a constant creation of issues in the relationship. He's not doing this enough, or he's not giving me enough, and I listen to it and they explain to me what he's actually doing or not doing that's not fulfilling their needs. And I'm like, that's normal. It's okay. It's okay. And that's what I love about your work and what you do and what you teach. Is so much of it is about having that loving, healthy, committed relationship that is based on realistic expectations. And understanding what a healthy relationship really looks like. It's not this Disney fairyland, tale. It's, it's different than that.
Well, it's just like we talked about earlier, where it's like the same, like two people can have, the same amount of childhood trauma, and one person's going to end up fine and one person's, going to end up insecure. The same thing happens in relationships. Like, your relationship partner isn't going to be perfect. Your relationship isn't going to be perfect all the time. A secure person is going to see that and just kind of roll with it. Be like, yeah, we had a bad day. We were kind of off. They were in a bad mood, and just kind of understand that at the foundation, everything's still okay, but you can have these little blips of problems, right? That person who's avoidant or anxious is going to have that same relationship, right? We'll assume it's the same exact relationship. When they see those little problems, right? That a day where the partner's in a cranky mood and like kind of snapped at you about something, that's going to send up these major red flags for them. That's actually unnecessary, right? It's like you said, it's just a normal relationship. It's part of being in a relationship with another person, right? You're going to have a lot of this, right? It's just how it goes.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's great. Okay. So, I don't know. Anything else that you want to add to this? I feel like I've learned a lot from this. I think this is amazing, and it's so helpful. Anything else that you feel like is important to add when it comes to attachment styles, what to think about as you navigate your relationship or your dating life?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that just kind of circle back on a theme that we mentioned earlier is that there's a lot of societal expectations about gender roles that play into this. And so one of the most common, by far the most common pairing between partners, just based on percentages, is two secure people, right? And so that's fantastic. But once you move beyond that, it's fairly common to have pairings where you have an avoidant male with an anxious female.
Yep.
Now, that combination isn't good because both people,
needless to say, it's going to be just fireworks. Oh, God.
You have two people that want the opposite things. They're both very sensitive about being hurt and left, and it's not total problems. But it's common, and they'll stay together because if people have these gender typical stereotypes about, like, that's just how guys are, that's just how ladies are, then they're like, I guess that's how it is, right? And they start really, just accepting this mediocre, horrible relationship as just like, I guess that's what I get from love, right? And that's just not true. I talk a lot about blind spots and stuff people get wrong, and that's just it's a big one, right? That avoidant male, he's unhappy because his female partner wants to get close to him all the time, and he's like, hell no, I don't want no parts of this. This is a problem for me. And then as he puts up walls, it activates her anxiety, and she's like, must get closer. So he's running, she's following, and it's tumultuous at best.
Yeah, to say the least. Right.
But when the one other thing is, like, anxious females, you said you deal with a lot of that in your section. Just know the research shows anxious females it's bad for relationships. Right, it creates a lot of extra drama that doesn't need to be there. And if you're in a relationship with someone who's anxious, imagine it from their perspective. You want more and more affirmations of love. that person keeps telling you they love you, they care about you, and all that kind of stuff, but their partner never believes them. And so it's like, what can I possibly do to make you believe I actually care? And the answer a lot of times is you're never going to be able to do enough. And that's very, talk about disempowering. That's certainly disempowering.
Well, and that's one concept I talk a lot about with Love Accelerator is when you're in a brand new relationship, I call it the cool down period, which is like you're going to go from this incredible euphoria of the honeymoon relationship and experience where you're just lovey-dovey. He's constantly calling you, texting you, want to be with you. And then once you find yourself in anywhere from 3 to 6 months, in my experience, it just tends to cool off. Maybe he's going to start focusing on work again, reaching out to old friends he hasn't talked to. He's going to want a weekend off a night, a night off a weekend where he can just do his own thing. And that is where the anxious comes in hard because they're like, my relationship's falling apart. What do I do? Oh, my God, where is this guy? And it's like, no, that's just normal life.
Yeah, it's not falling apart. It's coming together is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's that shift is showing a confidence in the relationship where it's like if you're constantly monitoring it, it's showing that you're not so sure about it. Like once they can kind of, your partner can shift priorities and not be so constantly monitoring the relationship, it shows a certain level of trust, right? It shows confidence. And so you have to reinterpret that for what it really is.
Yeah. Oh, well, that was great, Gary. I learned a lot through this. And just to really appeal to those anxious attachment style listening, next week's podcast is how to know if a man is falling in love with you. So I don't know if that's going to trigger some people that are listening here, but I think it'll be a fun one to talk about. And thank you so much, Gary. That was amazing. Anything else that you want to add, or do you think we covered it all?
No, I think, just as a general rule, like don't put up so many walls that you can't let the love in that you really are looking for in the first place. Like, I mean, you have to be vulnerable to experience the kind of relationship you want. And that with that vulnerability, just learn to trust your partner.
Yeah. Amen to that. Great place to end. Thanks, Gary.
Sure thing, man.